Hey, welcome to my channel. In this one, I'm going to be showing my process to make a simple cutting board. I'll start off by showing what type of wood I'm using. I got 3/4 inch walnut and 3/4 inch cherry, which is all from Rockler. The cherry piece is surfaced on 4 sides, and the walnut is only surfaced on 3 sides. Cutting board's going to end up being a little less than 24 inches long. You'll see that I'm using the cherry to mark my length. I realized I didn't need a pencil. I could just line up the cherry and the walnut against the saw blade, back it off just a hair, and then proceed with my cut. At this point in the project, nothing really has to be precise. Once it's all put together, we're going to come back and clean up the edges anyway. After I got done cutting both walnut boards down to length, I like to look over everything to see if there are any knots that might give the table saw some trouble. Luckily, everything I have here is pretty clean. Had a piece of scrap walnut lying around. It's the same thickness as what I'm using for this project, so I just grabbed it and used it just to set my blade height. I like to go about 1 tooth, maybe over the top of that piece of walnut. Another thing I like to do is double check that my fence is the same distance from the front of the blade as the back is. The table saw I'm using is a Craftsman. It wasn't really the most accurate thing out of the box, so I check it each time just to be sure. The width I am going for here is 1.25 inches. This will ultimately end up being the thickness of the cutting board. After a few minutes of running everything through the table saw, this is what we are left with. I took more time to spot check each piece. I'm looking for holes in the edge grain at this point. Anything that wasn't perfect, just threw it into the scrap pile and kept working. I like to play around with the order of my pieces to try to figure out the coolest pattern I can create. I was lucky that the walnut pieces I had contained a lot of sapwood. It looked pretty nice mixed in with the cherry, as you can see here. Now comes the glue up. Full disclosure, I use a ton of glue. I always do and always will. I like to make sure all the connecting surfaces get completely covered. It might be overkill, but hey, better safe than sorry. If you're making a cutting board, I would recommend using Type Bond 3. They claim it's approved for food contact and water resistance. The board I made about a year ago, I use it almost every day and it seems like it's holding up really well, so I would definitely recommend using that for this purpose. For clamping everything together, I'm just using 4 Harbor Freight bar clamps and a couple ratcheting bar clamps. I put blue painter's tape on everything. It saves me a ton of time and cleanup afterwards. It's always a good idea to use it. You will also notice that I have the cutting board lifted up on a couple scrap pieces of wood. That gives me the clearance I need to slide the bar clamps in. The important thing here is to make sure that your clamping pressure is even. It's established across the length of the board. I have used cauls on other boards that I had made in hopes of making the panel glue up a little bit more even. Quite frankly, I get better results without them, so in this example you'll see me not using them. It's always a good idea to try them if it's something you're interested in though. With a wet rag, you're able to get rid of a lot of the glue squeeze out ahead of time. I didn't do this on some of my past cutting boards and I absolutely regret it. This next shot, I'm just running the board through the table saw to clean up the edges. This can also be done with a circular saw and a straight edge clamp to the board. While this footage is rolling through, I just want to remind you, give me a like and a subscribe if you don't mind. We'll be posting more regularly from here on out. My plan for this channel is to show a lot of the projects that we work on in this house. Some I think are going to be pretty unique ideas, and you won't want to miss it. You can probably notice there's a little less glue on the board at this point. Off camera, I took a block plane and went over those areas. You could use a chisel to do the same thing or just sand it if that's your thing. For me, it was just easier to use the plane. Make sure you use a mechanical pencil so it breaks every 2 inches. I was just lazy and didn't feel like getting anything else, so you'll see me constantly struggle with this throughout the rest of the video. Right now I'm using 60 grit sandpaper on all sides. Since I marked the board with a pencil, you can really tell what you have left to sand. A good tip to know when you're done sanding is when there isn't a ton of visible glue left between the joined surfaces. At that point, you'll know you have a reasonably flat board on both sides, as long as you're consistent with your sanding. I didn't show it, but I usually test the flatness of the board on the table saw. At this point, my board was flat on both sides, so I used the router to round over all of the edges, starting with the edge grain on both sides. This isn't necessary. You can achieve the same result with an orbital sander and some final hand sanding to get it how you want it. After the edges are rounded over, I just repeat the sanding process for 120 and 220 grit. After sanding to 220, I always like to spray the board down with water and then let it completely dry. Once it's dry, you can resand it with 220 and you'll have an incredibly smooth result. Excuse my arm, it's going to be blocking the shot, ruining everybody's favorite part, which is the finishing process. Just putting on mineral oil, letting it sit for a while and soak in. A couple coats of that should do the trick. After I am satisfied with the mineral oil, I also like to apply Howard Butcher Block conditioner. A few coats of this stuff and we're going to be good to go. This video is almost a wrap. Thank you for taking your time to check it out. If you enjoyed it, please do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, like and share the video. If you have any suggestions, go ahead and toss me a comment down below.